What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of OneMindSyndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40k. In this one, I will be going over an excerpt from The Reflection Cracked, which has a very interesting situation proposed here that pits Lucius the Eternal, Fabius Bile, and a couple other Space Marines of the Emperor's Children, torturing and capturing Fulgrim of all people. So this is a very interesting excerpt, like I said before, because you don't really see this type of interaction between the Primarch and his gene sires. So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and dive into this, since we do have the Emperor's Children Codex coming sooner than later. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I can see his face, but something else lurks behind it. Something spawned by the same powers that granted us the power to fully experience the wonders that this galaxy has to offer. Before he can consider the matter further, Julius Carceron rose up behind Fulgrim and slammed his energized fist down on Fulgrim's skull. A blow that should have pulped its victim's head to a smeared red ruin merely drove Fulgrim to the ground. The Phoenician shook his head, and his bloody rictus grin put on Lucius in mind of the deathly iconography he had seen carved into Istvan V's ruins. As Fulgrim sought to push himself to his feet, Marius Valcheron jammed the end of his sonic cannon into Fulgrim's neck and unleashed a barrage of squealing harmonics that filled the gallery with ear-bleeding noise. Lucius cried out in pain, and Fulgrim's eyes rolled back in their sockets as he let out a groan of what sounded very much like delirious pleasure. The sword fell from the Primarch's hand, and he toppled to the cracked flagstones with a heavy thump. Lucius looked up, blinking away bright spots of light from his vision and hearing what sounded like a million bells clanging all at once. He stood a few millimeters from Verosheim, so he couldn't begin to imagine the effect that the blast must have had on Fulgrim. The surviving captains picked themselves up and formed a ring of dazed warriors around the fallen god. It had been a battle like no other, the warriors of a legion turning on their own Primarch, and the enormity of what they had done was not lost on them. It was the most terrible thing he had ever seen. It was the most wondrous thing he had ever seen. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, the lord of the Emperor's Children, master of the Third Legion, bound with the heaviest of fetters, chemically subdued and laid naked on a cold steel gurney like a corpse bound for dissection. Fulgrim's arms were thrown up above his head, his legs spread like the Vitruvian man of old. Lucius's eyes roamed Fulgrim's pale flesh, the alabaster firmness crisscrossed in a web of surgical scars and incisions, knotted ridges that spoke of unknowable procedures and unspeakable experimentation upon the secret flesh within. So, what do? First we wake him, said Fabius, stroking needle-tipped fingers over Fulgrim's chest. Assuming he doesn't just break free and kill us all. Then what? Said Lucius. We drive the creature out, said Fabius, with reason, with threats, and of course, with pain. Pain? What pain can you administer to a Primarch that he would feel? Fabius smiled his reptilian grin and promised a host of pains he alone knew would be only too glad to demonstrate. Enough talking, said Lucius, snatching up a set of bladed pliers and sliding them all over the middle finger of Fulgrim's right hand. With one swift, even pressure, he severed the finger at the middle knuckle, and a squirt of blood pulsed from the wound before slowing to a drip. Fulgrim howled, but whether it was in pain or pleasure, Lucius couldn't tell. Fabius snatched the pliers from Lucius with an angry scowl. Excruciation is a precise and meticulous art, a steeped pyramid of pain. To randomly cut and maim is the work of amateurs. I will have no part in such butchery." "Then stop talking and get on with it," said Lucius, "because it sounds to me like you're stalling." The swordsman has a point. Clad in Terminator armor, Julius dwarfed Fabius, and the apothecary nodded in acquiescence. "As you will it, first captain," said Fabius, turning to his instruments. "We shall begin with the pane of fire." Lucius felt his pulse race as Fabius lifted a cutting torch from the bench, snapping the igniting mechanism 3 times before the flame caught. Used to cut through sheet steel, the flame sharpened to a cone of blue hot light as Fabius adjusted the gas flow. Julius leaned over Fulgrim and said, "This is your last chance, demon spawn. Get out of our Primarch's body, and you need not suffer." "I welcome the suffering," said Fulgrim with bared teeth. The Space Marine nodded, and Fabius brought the flame down on the sole of Fulgrim's foot. The flesh curdled, running like molten rubber as it withered beneath the incredible heat. Fulgrim's back arced and his mouth stretched wide in a soundless scream as the veins and sinews in his neck lifted from his skin like tectonic ridges. Lucius watched bone rise from the melting skin as it peeled back, emerging white and gleaming for an instant before turning black. Marrow burned with a rich, fatty hiss, and the scent of seared flesh was rich. Lucius had smelled and tasted human meat before, but compared to that poor feast, this was an Epicurean delight. He saw the smell was having a similar effect on the other Marines. Fabius played the flame over Fulgrim's foot until all that remained below the ankle was a blackened mass of fused bone and boiled marrow that drooled to the tiled floor of the apothecarian. Julius took hold of the charred bone. "This suffering can all end," he said, regaining his composure with remarkable swiftness. Lucius licked his lips, still savoring the wondrously rich and flavorsome taste of Fulgrim's seared flesh. Fulgrim laughed. "Pain is truth," he said. "Suffering is the sharp end of the whip. Not suffering is the end of the whip the master holds in his hand. Every act of suffering is a test of love, and I will prove this to you by enduring all the pain you can inflict upon me, because I love you all." "These are not Fulgrim's words," snapped Caesarron. "They are honeyed lies to weaken our resolve." "Not true," said Fulgrim. "All the truths I have learned since taking the life of my brother have shown this to be indisputable. All things in this grand universe are linked to one another by invisible threads, even those things that appear opposites." "Look," said Lucius. "He's healing. You have to keep the pressure." Fabius transferred his gaze from Fulgrim's face to his healing foot with academic interest, while Caesarron and Viroshan each took up an instrument of excruciation. The battle captains took position on either side of Fulgrim and turned their devices upon the bound Primarch. Caesarron crunched knuckles with crimping pliers, while Visharon worked a flesh plane across Fulgrim's chest, peeling back long strips of skin with each caress. Fulgrim grinned. Truly the burden of happiness can only be removed by the balm of suffering. Lucius smelled Fulgrim's blood and longed to take up an awl or a hammer, but the look in the Primarch's eyes stayed his hand. The tortures being inflicted to him would have reduced a mortal to frothing madness, but Fulgrim appeared to be enjoying this experience. Their eyes met, and Fulgrim said, "Go on, Lucius. Take up one of Fabius's devices. Make my flesh scream." Lucius shook his head and crossed his arms for fear that he might do as his Primarch wished. Fabius began with the most ancient of interrogation techniques, the unveiling of his many devices of excruciation and explaining of the purposes to which they would be put. They range from mundane artifacts, such as any fashioner of metal or wood might employ. Hammers, needles, pliers, nails, torches, awls, planes, and slow-bit drills, to the more exotic implements of suffering, nerve splicers, organ liquefiers, chakra inflamers, marrow augers, and brainstem implants. This last device is one that will give me great pleasure to use, said Fabius, hooking a number of metal barbs into Fulgrim's spine. The gurney upon which Fulgrim lay had rotated about its long axis, revealing the flagellated shoulders and a back that was corrugated landscape of scar tissue. Lucius saw an admirable devotion to the Primarch's flesh, a single-minded pursuit of pleasurable agony that only the true devotee of pain could attain. What is it, and what does it do? Fabius smiled, pleased to be able to elaborate on this tool of suffering. It is a neural parasite I have engineered from gene-spliced xeno brain fluids and nanotech recovered from the Diasporic's hybrid captains. How insightful of you, my son, said Fulgrim. This is mildly diverting, I will admit, but pain to me is no more than an irritant. The pain you can inflict, anyway. Fabius circled the gurney, reading the signs of Fulgrim's biorhythms with increasing puzzlement. Lucius was no apothecary, but even he could see the readouts confirmed that they might as well have been reciting poetry for all the effect it was having on the Primarch. Marius ignored the apothecary's anger and took hold of Fulgrim's head, leaning down as though to kiss him. Instead, he slammed his Primarch's head down on the gurney and loosened a howl of grief-stricken rage that sent Lucius and Carceron flying. The sound reverberated around the chamber like the sonic boom of a low-flying storm bird, shattering every piece of glass in the room. Broken shards tumbled to tiles in 1,000 sharp tinks. You call me evil, but what do you decide what is good and what is evil? Are they not simply arbitrary terms coined by man to justify his actions, said Fulgrim. Think of how one measures good and evil, and you will see that what I am becoming, is a thing of perfect beauty, a thing of goodness. Lucius approached the steel slab and looked down upon the Primarch, sensing that his words were profound on a level that he could not yet understand, but which his future might depend on. He lifted an awl with a huge hook tip and worked it into Fulgrim's chest. Through scar tissue that had not had fully healed, Fulgrim grimaced as the metal pierced his flesh, but Lucius couldn't decide on the emotion behind the Primarch's expression. So, what are you becoming? He asked. You ask the wrong questions, answered Fulgrim, as Lucius worked the awl into him, inch by steel inch. Then what would the right question be? Marius and Julius leaned in as Fabius spat curses at the months of lost work that swirled and frothed around his feet. The right question is, what does the universe move towards? And that can only be answered by understanding where we come from. Marius followed Lucius's example and selected an instrument of torture from the collection of devices. He turned the pear-shaped device around in his hands, twisting a metal cog handle that gradually spread the levers of the pear apart. Satisfied, he returned it to its original shape and moved down the gurney to place the device between the Primarch's legs. We come from Terra, said Marius. Is that what you mean? Fulgrim simply smiled and said no. Further back than that, as far back as it is possible to go. Marius shrugged and worked his device into position with a series of grunts as Julius lifted a series of silver wands, some long, some short, all tapered to sharpness at one end. One by one, Carceron pierced Fulgrim's body with 7 needle-tipped wands, running in a line from the crown of his head to his groin. It was clear Carceron was no stranger to the apparatus as he attended to his work with a craftsman's diligence. Lucius wondered if he had chosen poorly in comparison to these instruments of agony, but decided that he liked the simplicity of the awl as he pressed it deeper into Fulgrim's unknown organs and inhumane biology. Fulgrim watched Caesseron with the attention of a proud master watching his student take flight for the first time without instruction. The Primarch shook his head as Caesseron stood erect and said, "Your positioning of the Swadhakan chakra needle is slightly off. Perhaps due to the intrusion of Marius's implement. A little higher might be better." Caesseron bent to check and readjusted the needle as he saw that Fulgrim was indeed correct. Without a word of acknowledgement, he ran a series of copper wires from the end of each needle to a thrumming bank of generators. With a flick of the switch, a deep brass note of power filled the chamber, and sparks of high voltage energy hummed through them. Fulgrim's jaw clenched and caged lightning danced in the black vortices in his eyes. His skin darkened, and Lucius smelled the electric tang of a body burning from the inside out, enduring enough pain to last an innumerable amount of lifetime. Fulgrim resumed speaking. The universe began in simplicity, with an event of such rapid expansion that it cannot ever be measured. In the first fractional moments of the existence, the universe was a place of such staggering simplicity that we cannot ever begin to imagine it. But over time, those simple elements began to cohere, to come together in ever more complex forms. Particles became atoms, atoms molecules, and they kept growing in complexity to form the first stars. Those newly birthed stars lived and died over millions of years. Their explosive deaths fueled the birth of yet more stars and planets. You and I, we are luminous beings fashioned from the heart of stars. Poetic. But what does this have to do with good and evil? Lucius was surprised, for he had always thought the first captain had little interest in anything other than the gratification of his own desires. Oh, how he could wreak the greatest pain upon an enemy. "I'm getting to that," promised Fulgrim, and Lucius had to remind himself that they were in the midst of torturing him. He wanted to speak out, but Fulgrim's words held him fast. "None of this is coming together at random," explained Fulgrim. "It is all part of the universe's nature, its tendency towards complexity, and that is what makes it most exquisite. Now, as I was saying, all things are part of the cycle of building and coming together, from the lowest organism to the highest functioning sentience. Given the right circumstances, everything will tend towards becoming something more beautiful, more perfect, more complex. It has been this way since the beginning of the universe's lifespan, and that is as inescapable as it is inevitable." Lucius nodded and turned the awl in a wide circle within Fulgrim's body. "And where does this lead? What lies at the end of this journey?" Fulgrim shrugged, though it was impossible to tell whether it was conscious gesture or the result of the current boiling of his bones. Who can say? Some call it godhood, others nirvana. For want of a better term, I call it perfect complexity. It is the ultimate aim of all things, whether they are aware of their role in the universe or not. Now the question of good and evil is inextricably linked to this ongoing journey to perfect complexity. And the answer is simple. Fulgrim's words trailed off as his back arced and a line of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Lucius wanted to believe it was his penetrative awl picking Fulgrim's spine, and that was the cause of the pain. But with all three warriors working their excruciating arts, it was impossible to be sure. Fabius circled the gurney, monitoring Fulgrim's vital signs with growing alarm. "You're killing him," he said. "One of you must stop." "No," said Marius. "The pain will drive the demon thing out. It will relinquish its hold on Fulgrim before it allows itself to die." "Simpleton," snapped Fabius. "Do you think such things such as demons fear the destruction of their mortal hosts? Its essence will simply cohere in the warp once you've destroyed the physical vessel. Then perhaps the time has come to use the neural parasite. said Marius. "The thing you crafted from the Diosporix hybrid captains." Fabius nodded in agreement, and Lucius saw the apothecary had been waiting for just such an opportunity. Bending low, he placed the half-helm upon Fulgrim's skull and attached thin lengths of clear plastic tubing to the silvered metal. The tubing coiled across the floor to a humming machine that looked to have been designed by creatures that bore no relation to humanity. It pulsed with a complex series of lights and sounds that existed in realms beyond. "This had better work," said Caesarion, jabbing Fabius in the chest. "If you have spoken false, none of your foetid elixirs will stop me from killing you." The sparkling liquid entered Fulgrim's body, and the gasp of a sensuate who has at least discovered some sensations as yet unimagined escaped his lips. Fulgrim's eyes snapped open, and he looked about himself like a dreamer awakening from golden memories of half-remembered friends and old loves. "Ah, my sons," he said, as though pain was torturing him little more than a gentle caress. "Where was I?" Blood sheened his flesh like a crimson gown, and the sharp tang of roasting meat oozed from his every orifice. Heat radiated along the silver needles jutting from his body, and his pelvis was bent up at an unnatural angle by the expansion of the macabre device of Marius. At last Fulgrim's body relaxed, sinking back into the gurney with a concentrated sigh of relief. His limbs settled on the cold metal, and Fabius gave a triumphant grin that exposed his yellow teeth and glistening serpentine tongue. "I have him," he said. "What would you have me do first, Captain?" "Can you force it to speak truthfully?" "Of course." "A manipulation of no consequence," Fabius told him. "Of course. A manipulation of no consequence," Fabius told him. Lucius frowned at the swiftness of Fabius' assurance, wondering at the ease of which the apothecary appeared to have mastered what he had described as being nigh impossible. He slid the all-clear of Fulgrim's body and moved around the gurney to stand next to Fabius. Vitae noctis or not, he would kill Fabius if it emerged. The faces on the apothecary's long coat flexed as though rising and falling on a gelid tide, and their mute howls implored Lucius to end their suffering. The swordsman ignored them, calculating where best to stab with the awl if he needed to kill Fabius. The apothecary seemed oblivious to Lucius's presence, and worked his fingers over the alien device like a maestro at a keyboard. Fulgrim danced a jig on the gurney, and his face twisted into delirious smiles as he felt what was being done to him. "Oh, my sons," breathed the Primarch, "you want the truth? How artless of you. Do you not realize that the truth is the most dangerous thing of all?" "Your time here is at an end, demon," snarled Marius. "You have no place amongst our legion. You are a thing of evil." Fulgrim laughed and said, "Oh, Marius, you insist on calling me a thing of evil, but such a word is meaningless unless you understand the truth of what good and evil represent." "Very well. You wish the truth? I'll give it to you. If you accept the universe is constantly moving towards its final state of perfect complexity, and that this is its inevitable destination, then anything that hinders this process must be defined as evil. By the same logic, anything that promotes this ongoing journey is surely good. I am moving towards that perfect complexity, and by hindering my ascension, you are acting in the cause of evil. Alone in this chamber, I am the only thing that is good. You seek to dull our wits with absurd talk of this nature of the universe and good and evil. I know evil, and I am looking at it. Then you are looking at yourself, Marius. Have you not seen the truth of it yet? The truth of what? The truth of me." Lucius stepped away from the gurney as Fulgrim's biceps swelled with sudden power and his right arm tore free of the restraints that bound him to the gurney. An instant later, his left arm was free, and the Primarch sat bolt upright, tearing loose the needles piercing his skin and ripping free the biomonitors Fabius had attached at the beginning of their tortures. Fulgrim kicked Marius away and tore loose the device that the third captain had worked upon with a sigh of regret. It fell to the floor of the apothecarian with a wet clatter and rolled like a vicious flower of red-stained iron. "A pity," said Fulgrim. "I was beginning to enjoy that." And with that being said, that is the end of this excerpt that is more philosophical than it is torturous. So we really learn here what exactly is going on in the mind of either Demon Fulgrim or Fulgrim himself. He's trying to achieve what he believes the universe is trying to achieve, and that is perfection. Perfection at the end of it all. And for his legionnaires to be binding him, torturing him, impeding him from achieving this apotheosis of perfection, he says that they are the evil ones. For anybody who tries to stop this thing of nature is evil in and of itself. And we really get to see Fabius and Lucius kind of fighting amongst themselves to even decide if what they're doing is the right thing to do. Time and time again, we see Lucius almost wanting to go forward with his own actions, but at the same time kind of stop and think, why am I doing this? So it's very much a conundrum for these warriors, except for Marius and the other captain, who are pretty much just gung-ho about torturing Fulgrim. And at the end of the day, they kind of don't really get anywhere with this. Fulgrim seems to enjoy all these torturous devices, the melting of his bones, the liquefying of his organs, and he's literally burning from the inside. And nothing seems like it's really causing him pain, besides maybe the power fist punch to the back of the head and the sonic weapon to his neck. That seemed to really put him down, while the rest of the stuff was kind of like child's play to him. So we really see just how much a Primarch can really take when they're being tortured, which says a lot considering that Conrad Kurz is like an expert when it comes to torturing. I mean, just look at what he did to Vulcan. So we can pretty much imagine that the things done to Fulgrim here were done to Vulcan. But the thing is, while Fulgrim is able to kind of regenerate slowly, Vulcan is a perpetual, so even things that are capable of killing him, he'll come back from the dead, so there's no holding back. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. Let me get your thoughts on this excerpt here. What do you think was the real reason why Fulgrim, or the demon bound within Fulgrim, was trying to tell his legionnaires? So hopefully we get more types of stories like this when the codex drops, hopefully sooner than later. But again, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you guys can get more 40k lore. And that's all I got for you guys today. As always, it's been the Sound Alchemist, part of OneMindSyndicate, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.